Thank you again for being with us today. This is an important day. After 2019 London summit, this is the first time the leaders are meeting. It's in Brussels, and many things have changed since then. We have been going through a pandemic, and there was a presidential election in the US, which is very many people consider critical for the future of NATO. How do you think this, say, 18 months changed the NATO? Do you think it was a transformative moment for the organization?
I think that NATO is going through a transformation that actually predates the last 18 months because the reasons that NATO was created in the first place all those years ago have changed significantly because we've moved into a new era of different types of security threats that aren't based on the original hard security, the confrontation with the Soviet Union. We've moved ahead, but I think in the last 18 months the COVID pandemic really underlined or enhanced the reasons behind these new security threats, because COVID itself represented a new sort of security threat into the entire world, and attached to that disinformation, hybrid warfare that sort of emanated out of the pandemic. The security of supply chains was another key issue. So I think we're in a process of transforming. We don't know what the end result yet is going to be.
At 2019 summit, Secretary General was asked to prepare a report about the future of NATO. And last year, I think they had the interviews, 10 people that were former policymakers mostly, and experts appointed by Secretary General prepared the report, 2013 report. And many people believe that this will be the first summit that leaders will have a face-to-face conversation about this report. What do you think about this report, and do you think the recommendations that the reporters provided in this document is feasible or adaptable?
I think this summit is really a starting point to elaborate on some of the proposals that are put forward in that report by the Secretary General. If I remember correctly, there's 8 proposals. I don't think there's going to be any conclusion at the end of this summit. That would be far too much wishful thinking. But obviously these proposals are really taking NATO into a different direction, working on issues that weren't there before, whether it's cybersecurity, green security, health security, China, for example. So it's a lot of different issues, and I don't see that we have, let's say, solidarity from all member states on all of these issues. There's different views, there's different visions. So it's about coming together to have more of an exchange on these points and then moving on from there.
You responded to my third question. Actually, my third question was, how optimistic should NATO countries be about the summit? Because there are high expectations, and it is partly because of the approaching end of the pandemic, and partly because of the Biden's reassurances for NATO. So are you reassured by the Biden's statements about NATO? Do you think it is sufficient? What should the US administration do after this point to reassure that they would be, at least in the near future, until 2024, let's say, be tied up to NATO?
Well, I think that obviously all NATO member states were really happy with the election of Joe Biden, because as we know, his predecessor made some very worrying statements about NATO. And that isn't the case now. Joe Biden has reassured the allies, that the United States is there, it's going to stay there. But at the same time, he does repeat some of the same messages that Trump was saying. For example, meeting the 2% defense spending. What you say is correct. Everything can change again in 2024. So it means that NATO members shouldn't sit on their laurels, as they say in English. They need to be more proactive in terms of meeting defense spending, but also taking steps nationally to meet a lot of NATO goals, building resilience in their own states, and working together in a more, let's say, comprehensive way. Because over the last years, you could see there's a lot of differences between the allies on different topics, which sort of questions a lot of the processes that are going on internally. Yes, we need the United States. United States is obviously the biggest and most powerful actor in NATO, but at the same time, the other member states still need to step up and do more.
And the last part is about Turkey and Turkey's contribution for the NATO.
I mean, it's fair to say that there have been some problems, more than a few, over the last few years, with some member states of NATO and Turkey that haven't seen eye to eye. But I mean, my perspective is this. I mean, Turkey has always been and will continue to be, a staunch ally within NATO. I mean, just looking at the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, I mean, Turkey is on the front line against Russian expansionism in those regions. And I sometimes think this is not enough appreciated. We frequently hear messages from some NATO allies. I mean, I'm going to mention President Macron here, but he's not the only one, that seems to incessantly complain about Turkey, say that Turkey's not an ally, Turkey, questioning Turkey's membership of the alliance. But I mean, I think you need to look at the bigger picture. Obviously, he's referred to, Turkey in Syria or Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean, where he's seen, and not only him, they've seen Turkey as playing a more malign role. But again, you need to have a more nuanced position, because if you look at the broader picture of what Turkey actually contributes to NATO, not just now but over the decades, it's been massive. And if you ask other NATO allies who aren't so, let's say, influenced as President Macron, you'll get a different answer. They'll say that Turkey remains a bulwark of European security. Its position is irreplaceable. Turkey is also the only large Muslim country in NATO, and that's unique in itself. So I think sometimes there's a lot of Turkish bashing that goes on about Turkey's foreign policy, but also how Turkey blocks certain decisions within NATO. Turkey's not the only country that blocks. Turkey generally blocks and unblocks. I mean, we've seen Turkey, go ahead with some things that it was not that particularly keen on in the past. I mean, it's now rejoined this Baltic policing mission, which to me symbolizes that Turkey recognizes or has doubled down on the need to boost NATO's presence and position on the eastern flank. Whereas in the past, we all know Turkey has criticised NATO for not giving enough attention to the southern flank. But I think it's very pragmatic of Turkey. So for me, Turkey remains a reliable partner and a crucial partner. And let's see what happens at the summit. Turkey's not going to be leaving NATO anytime soon, as sorry to disappoint the French.
Going back to the Eastern Mediterranean, that's one of the significant issues that NATO Secretary General in person and NATO as an organization is involved. And since the beginning of the tensions or disputes in the region, actually, Turkey has offered to have an international conference to resolve these problems among the NATO member countries. How likely do you think there will be an international conference? And what do you think, looking now forward, what should be the way to resolve these disputes?
I mean, of course, it would be great to have an international conference. Whether it's going to happen or not remains to be seen. But I mean, ultimately, the issues in the Eastern Mediterranean go back to the Cyprus problem. It's very simple. If the Cyprus problem was resolved, there would be no issues in the Eastern Mediterranean. Everything would be, everybody would be nice and friendly, and things would move forward. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like this is going to happen. I mean, there seems to be a tendency to blame Turkey for the non-resolution of the Cyprus issue. But I think we all know, so do the people in the United Nations and elsewhere, that back in 2004, the Annan Plan, and more recently in Crans-Montana, you can't blame the crumbling of these talks onto Turkey. So I think there needs to be a different approach. There needs to be perhaps more pressure put onto the Greek Cypriots vis-a-vis this. But I mean, coming back to the international conference, of course it can be useful. Whether or not it will resolve anything, because the main parties here, the Cypriots, Greece and Turkey, have very different opinions on the delimitation and the gas in the region. I mean, it's all the more strange because, I mean, we're moving to a time where, we won't be having pipelines anymore anyway, which would make that argument, a non-argument in the first place. But let's see.